Good afternoon, Johnny.
Good afternoon, David.
Welcome to the channel. Today we have a very special guest, Johnny Hammond, who is one of our group mentors at Animas. Johnny started his professional coaching journey with Animas in 2018 and has since amassed a wealth of coaching qualifications, far too many to list. But some highlights include being ICF PCC-level, EMCC-accredited team coach, and an NLP Master Practitioner. Johnny's got a fantastic website with a plethora of different services he provides, everything from founder leadership and team coaching through to emotional intelligence and somatic coaching. So I definitely recommend checking that out. But it's great to have you here, Johnny. Thanks for agreeing to be interviewed. I'd love to start by asking you, when people ask you, what do you do for a living? What do you say?
It's a great question, isn't it? Well, I'm a coach. First of all, that's what I'll say, and I keep it very clear like that. But I think it evolves over time, but classically, and it depends in which environment. But if you want to talk about the elevator pitch, I'm an executive leadership and team coach. That's pretty much what I say is a quick first introduction.
Thanks, Johnny. We had a great chat before the interview, actually, about how a lot of people can talk about what they do and how they do it. And I'm curious as to why you do what you do.
Yeah, thanks, David. Because I mean, it's interesting because it all started with why. Now there's some drilling and stuff going on. So if you hear that, there, just excuse that building works going on around us at the moment. But it also the reason I came to coaching was because in my early 20s, I had, I guess, what one can only call an awakening. I went through a challenging time that meant that I went and to discover and go on a journey of self-discovery. And that took me to many, many places, working with many, many amazing people. During that time, I discovered my purpose. I discovered my calling, and it was very, very clear to me. And the calling it was shifting interconnected consciousness. And I kind of abridged that to shifting consciousness. But every time I abridge it, the calling, if you like, so to speak, says, no, it's shifting interconnected consciousness and stay with that. Because I wasn't at that time, and I'm talking the early 90s, I didn't really exactly know what that meant. I just knew to trust in the fact that that's what it was. And kind of, and I didn't, I didn't accept the calling. If we look at the hero's journey at that point, I refused the calling, and I carried on in the kind of much more commercial world and being entrepreneurial, and then starting a very early stage tech business in the mid 90s. So I refused the calling, and it only took me about 30 years to accept the calling. And that came in the form of deciding I knew I turned 52, and I knew I had the sense that it was going to be now or never. And so I went back to my purpose, which had been knocking on the door louder and louder and louder. And it was right, okay. And it just so happened that coaching became what I decided to do to help to live that purpose. And so, I use coaching is obviously the label, the name of it, of what I do, and it's the profession, and but it's all about helping to shift consciousness and helping to shift interconnected consciousness with the work I do. And that's the why. That's the why. And it's a very strong calling, and it influences all the decisions I make. So yeah, that's the why.
Thanks, Johnny. I'm curious as to just understanding what you mean by shifting interconnected consciousness.
I was curious about that too. So, I was really curious about it, and shifting consciousness, really what did it mean? And I've learned to really trust my instinct. I've learned to trust those whispers, or when you really connect with something. And for me, it's become clearer and clearer and clearer, and it's unfolding in the work that I do. That shifting consciousness is kind of first of all, before the interconnected piece, is around a really kind of awakening that self awareness, awakening that level of consciousness. So we are conscious in our choices and in who we are, understanding who we are, understanding others, understanding we're part of a greater system. We're not, and how we are all, and then this leads to the next point, interconnected. And so my work is I didn't come with a handbook. My work is unfolding in front of me, and it's becoming clearer and clearer. And no, recently I just got a new book that I can't wait to read, by Peter Hawkins, who I just think is an amazing a mentor, really. But he's a trainer and a writer and author, um, and I think he's a coach. And he's just written a book called Beauty in Leadership and Coaching, and its role in transforming human consciousness. So, it's kind of, for me, this transformation of our consciousness, this shift for the betterment and the interconnectedness of who we are as humanity. And that sounds very lofty, but I see it happening, even in the whole ripple effect we talk about as coaches, and for me, it's just incredible when you help people to tap into that potential, to light up their potential, and then the contributions they make to others, and that's part of that kind of shifting in consciousness, and how they grow and evolve, and how they become more self-aware and aware, and what that and how that impacts the system that they are part of and the relationships that they have. And for me, I see that kind of knock-on effect, and so it's starting to become clearer as to what the why and the calling is, what it was, and as I say, it's unfolding.
Thanks, Johnny. And what drives you to do the work that you do today?
That purpose. That's exactly what drives me. And sometimes, I just love the work I do one to one. I love the work I do in groups, and I love the work I do in teams. Um, And it's so interesting. So much of my work, because of when I started training, it was like it ended up being online. We had when I first started coaching in 2018. Um, it just so happened a number of my clients were international. My first clients were international, so I ended up being on Zoom. Then COVID happened, and it ended up being on Zoom, and I just ended up being on Zoom so much because of that, which is great. It means I can, work with a global client base, and I can say yes to that work. Um, However, I also love being in person, and I love that in-person work. And I do the team coaching work, the group coaching work. I do disc facilitation workshops, and the energy in the room when people start to connect with each other, and they start to understand more about themselves and others and the people they're working with. And sometimes that's the messy middle. The work can be, as a coach, you don't know where that's going, but you're holding that space and you're working with it. But it is just, I was in a session last week, and it was that I was facilitating, and it was so off the charts, and the energy, I was just getting goosebumps with the energy in the room, and it's that work that I do that drives me, is seeing those breakthroughs, seeing clients working on themselves, and doing that reflective work. And there's moments where they just have those kind of, like, as we know, those aha moments, where they kind of, and you just holding the space. And it's just something very special about that work. And every day I kind of pinch myself and I go, "Oh, I'm doing this work." And I'll get off client sessions and just think, "Oh my God, it's such a privilege." So yeah, that's why. That's what drives me, and it's a kind of reinforcing, a kind of that flywheel approach. It just reinforces and reinforces with the work I do. And I think what's interesting is, I've ran businesses where I've been in partnership with other people when I wasn't in the coaching world, in the entrepreneurial world. And I think it's very interesting being a coach in that journey of being a solopreneur, and all of that means. And I've really been discovering, particularly in the last year, that importance of stretch, and that importance of kind of stepping out of your comfort zone, which of course we work with clients all the time. So I really find myself walking the talk all the time, and that stretch, and realizing, the importance of stretching myself professionally, saying yes to projects and proposals and opportunities that I might have maybe shied away from in the past. And to this year, I've seen, in the last couple of years, seen a lot of growth because of that work. So that continues to help motivate me as well, in terms of like going for the stretch.
Mm. I'm curious as to what's happened in the last 6 years, Johnny, since 2018. I know we had a great conversation before today about all the qualifications that you've taken and how you're finding the right balance between working on your business and also in your business. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that. that journey for you?
Yeah, twin track in many ways, So I guess I was running a consultancy business beforehand. I'd ran my own businesses beforehand as well before that. And so I had a commercial background. So for me, running a business, I was no stranger to running a business. However, training, and that was after 30 years of work. I started work at 18 with a wonderful woman called Lynn Franks. I was in the PR world at that time. And of course, I didn't become a coach till I was 52. So all of my entrepreneurial work, my understanding of running businesses, of founding businesses, of marketing, of PR, of all the things I've done, um, meant that I was the person I was at that point, that version of me. Becoming a coach, that was a change in profession. That was a transition. And, initially that was quite a challenge to work with that. But it was very interesting because in 2018, I decided to go with Animas to train. There was a few coaching schools that I'd looked at, but I wanted to go deeper. I was already consulting with founders and with clients that I knew they were my ideal clients. I was already working with them. But for me, it was this real sense of no, I wanted to become a coach to really help them to tap into their true potential, not advise them. That was the hardest bit I had to learn to start with. And, taming the advice monster was really, really hard in my early stages of training. But, Animus really helped that for me to really understand those core principles and develop that presence muscle, and that's never left me as a result of the Animus training. So the last 6 years, what we were talking about really was about the professional development versus the working on the business, working with clients, and striking that balance. And it was really interesting. At the end of the Animus course, it was brilliant, and I absolutely loved it and learned so much. And I was coaching, and already, I made the commercial decision that I would be charging clients from the moment I was, open for business, and I would be charging, a realistic amount of money, and then I would evolve that as I got better and better at what I did. Kind of for me, I was just, what do you charge as a coach? Kind of like one of those first questions. But um, I guess why am I saying that? I think I felt that I wanted more. I was still hungry to learn more. And a colleague of mine at the end of Animus, he said, Johnny, you don't have to boil the ocean. And something inside of me said, "But I do." And what he meant was, you don't have to boil the ocean in terms of training. You've done enough with Animus. You can go and coach and be a great coach just work, having all that training. And something in me just really wanted to understand humans better. The human psychology, human development, human growth, and so much more. So I have boiled a small part of the ocean in the last 6 years. Has been I've really loved it and just gone on an incredible journey with incredible peers that I've trained with, incredible mentors, trainers, teachers, and the journey continues. But my point was, there comes a point where I realized that in the learning, I was at some point, it came to a kind of an inflection point where I realized I was actually kind of almost like undoing my confidence. So it was almost working against me because I was then going back through that learning cycle of consciously consciously competent, unconsciously I was going through the learning cycle and going back a lot, and it was like, and then I realized that actually there was a moment in time. Last year, I did an advanced executive coaching program. It was absolutely brilliant. And after that, I realized, and it was a year intensive program in terms of like not every day, it was modules that we worked on, an incredible reflective essay, a theoretical essay that we had to write. So not reflective, theoretical essay supporting, our coaching approach, our coaching methodologies. And I use that to pull together all of the integrated approaches that I work with to kind of get a sense of like, well, who am I as a coach? That was really that question. And then after that, I realized, okay, I think I've come to the end of that accelerated intensive learning curve. It was an instinctive, that was the end of that cycle. And then what might the learning look like? So, but that did take a lot of time. It took a lot of money. I mean, I have, ask any coach that knows me or works with me. I have hundreds of books. I've just moved, so there's nothing behind me. It's brand new. So in the coaching trade, we might, in transition work, I also do with clients, but I didn't mention that. I'll talk about that later, which I love. We've talked about the clean slate. So I kind of have a clean slate here, and I'm wondering what I might populate it with next. So I've got all my books are in boxes, but they're also here. So, my partner's always saying, why do you get a Kindle? And I'm like, no, but I like paper. Anyway.
Definitely. Thanks, John. It's interesting. I'm curious as to. I think when people have a career change, they think there's an element of throwing it all away, and I'm wondering how much you were able to bring through from your entrepreneurial background, and also if there's anything you had to unlearn in the process of moving into coaching.
So much. David, what a brilliant question. So a colleague of mine, he's a serially successful founder, exited multiple times. And I was doing some consulting work with him, and he said, Johnny, burn your boats. It's kind of an Anthony Robbins phrase, burn your boats. Don't do any consulting. Turn off the consulting. Focus on the coaching. Now, Numpty here took that kind of a face value. And it was great advice, but it was really, really challenging. It was really challenging. And, I would kind of, if someone said to me, how did you do it? I would say, don't necessarily do it the way I did it, because I think if I'd done it again, I might have had more of a portfolio approach. It was very, very challenging, particularly early on, to just survive on coaching revenue early on. And I turned off the consulting tap. However, to your point, there was so much I knew about building businesses. There was so much I knew about, being a founder, and those were my ideal clients. And that's where I really started my journey. So, and as I said, I'd already been consulting with them. However, I went for a new client base to only for my coaching services. I did that with practice clients early on as well, and then it kind of started to grow from there. And I burnt my boats, which meant that I absolutely 1000% focused on being a professional coach and everything that meant. And I didn't dilute what I was doing from that point of view. So, if I was going to give any advice at all, it would be early on. I was really like, absolutely no way. It's client led. However, every so often with facilitation, for example, it's a facilitation hat. And I'll say, with my facilitation hat on or whatever, but I'll be very, very clear. So, and I don't give advice. And I would often say to founders, I remember very early on, they go, well, I know you know how to do this because you've been a founder, you've been a consultant, why don't you give me advice? And I said, well, because, every time I do, I know it's nowhere near as good as the advice that you're going to give yourself every single time. So it's just, whenever I ask clients, I might early on have had, oh yeah, you could do this, you could do that, you could do the other, and then they come up with what they come up with. There's no way I could have second guessed that, or, and just getting out of my own way was so important. But I bring with me, I think Nick Bolton once said this as well. It was a really wonderful piece of information. Really, it's great to have the empathy, the understanding. So for me, that's where my experience of being a founder, an entrepreneur, a PR guy, a band manager, all the different things I've done over the years, a writer, all of these things is all there. However, and it's working in whatever ways it's working. So I bring all of me to the coaching, but I do it through the lens of a coach. So if that makes sense at all, I have an empathy and an understanding of the challenges that scale up founders, startup founders have, and the teams they have. I have that real understanding because I've lived it, I've been there, I've gone through that. So I really have that empathy. And a lot of the founders say to me, I chose you as my coach because you've been there and done it. So, however, when I'm coaching and I'm in those sessions, I'm using everything I learned at Animas and all the other stuff as well. However, it is entirely client led. And I'm so happy that I burnt the boats and really disciplined myself and became a coach as a result. The atomic habits thing, you know, you go out the door, if by putting your trainers on every day and running every day, you become a runner. So I was, putting my coaching trainers on every day, going out the door, and I became coach. And mysteriously at some point that happened.
Thanks, Charlie. On that topic, actually, of sort of putting the running trainers on, how much of your sort of coaching experience is it, or in your experience, if someone's trying to bridge the gap between taking more courses and gaining more accreditations and qualifications versus getting more on the job, hands-on experience, how is one to how would you recommend bridging that gap and getting that balance right between sort of the theory and the practice and the doing?
I think it's a real individual thing. I really do. I think for me, continued professional development is absolutely, again, I'm going to love it. I'm curious by nature. You've heard that. Uh, I think it's, I mean, first of all, Animas, the training I had at Animas, I absolutely hand on heart, that's what I draw on in every single coaching session. So, did I need anything else? Nope, not at all. Not necessarily. Maybe in the executive coaching arena, I felt that some of the training I went off and then got because it was a foundational course at Animas. I then went and did the corporate coaching course at Animas with Mia, which was brilliant. And I have done other trainings that have advanced that, but ultimately for me, that's been the core that I bring with me all the time. So I think what advice would I give to close that to win that gap? I mean, I think it's important to work on the business, to have a business, I guess, first point. But everyone's got their own how they want to create that, or what, it's what was the acronym we used? Was it life in a training? What's the lifestyle you want? What's the impact you want? What's the finance you want to make? What are the emotions you want to have, the experience you want to have? And I think understanding that is really important to then how you decide you want to work on the business, in the business, and develop, and what kind of business do you want, what kind of life do you want as a coach.
Thanks, Charlie. I'm also curious as to in the world of the business that you've been in for a long time, and with the clients that you're coaching, especially founders in the tech and digital new startups area. How many of the challenges that they're facing today are challenges that you've faced in the past, or how many are completely new in this very rapidly changing world that we live in?
Yeah, well, so you know I was a founder in the tech space in the mid 90s, when, it was pre the internet gold rush. So, it was like, what is this thing called the internet? I'd done computer coding at school, so I wasn't a stranger to it, but it was like 14.4, you kind of like dial up, and it was so. I think let's start with me as an individual working on me. If my current self, if I had spoken to my future self then, the advice I would have got would have been like a massive download because I was not self aware. Even though I'd gone on this journey of this awakening beforehand, I had an empathy and an understanding of things and a kind of a spirituality, as you were, that I was in touch with at that. But and was much more holistic and balanced and all of those things. However, I was not self-aware in terms of between stimulus and response. I have a choice. I was highly reactive in stressful situations, and I think there were many times when I was suffering from just fatigue, and as a result, showing up triggered, reactive, anxious, and you know, that for me, I see, we're human beings; it's universal, and that doesn't change in a sense that it's only got quicker. Change has only got quicker. I mean, I think with startups and scale ups, we're always pivoting. You're changing, you're adapting in so many different ways. And as a founder, it's about so a growth mindset, a fixed mindset is going to be really challenging if you're a founder because it's always evolving, changing, adapting. I think the difference I've seen is the speed. The speed. I once heard it said, I don't know who said it, that thing is that, change is going to be the slowest today that it's ever been. So today is going to be slow. It's never going to slow down. It's just going to get faster and faster. And I don't know how possible, but it is got much faster. It's so much more interconnected. And as we know, so that's what I see is it's much faster. You're dealing with much more uncertainty, much more. So the VUCA acronym, I see that definitely, and I think that's been a big difference. I think it was a little bit more. It wasn't as interconnected. It wasn't as fast in the mid 90s, or when I was a founder at that time. So dealing with what was happening that was not in my control is definitely sped up.
And how can someone with so much experience in a particular area or background walk that line between that very fine line between coaching and mentoring, given that they've got so much experience and wisdom that they can speak from and impart to their client, but we know that there's enormous power in letting the client devise their own solutions.
Yeah, I let it go. I literally, but it was hard work, particularly the first 6 to 12 months was really hard, but I was really, really disciplined. The training really taught me to tame the advice monster. And I had to sit on my hands. I really I became a different person. I rewired how I operated, and I just don't now. I absolutely don't give advice. Um, you know, Sometimes people ask if I would be their mentor. I have thought about it at times. Would I? Because of course, coaching and mentoring, there's two different services I could offer, and they are kind of close cousins in some respects. So you have the EMCC, which is, but I think for me, pure coaching is where I want to stay. And so, again, I believe that, they are creative, resourceful, and whole, and they have the best answers for them. And, I'm very aware that when I enter into a client's world, as soon as I do, the moment I do, even in a chemistry conversation, the very first contact, I'm becoming part of their system. So for me, it's about not polluting that system and about really holding the space to then step outside the system and the story and what's happening there, and to really then be in best service of the client so that I can help them to tap into their being creative, resourceful, and whole themselves, but also within their system and helping them to connect better with the system. So I don't want to bring myself into that system. So I really got, more and more see the benefit of that. And it's really, really being built. So for me, almost like it seems like a bit of a distant past. Going, well, how would you do a marketing campaign? Or, who would you hire as a senior CMO? Or what would you, from your experience, what that it doesn't really come into the equation so much, other than I hired you, or I came to you, or I wanted you as my coach because you've been there and done it. I think it's because very right in the early stage conversations, I set the frame, I set the relationship, and then it's on that basis that we work together.
That's it's interesting, John. I once heard that all coaches are leaders, but not all leaders are coaches. And my experience of leaders are you can tell the leaders who are trained in coaching and have a coaching style to the ones who aren't. The ones who aren't tend to want to reach a solution fast as possible, and are happy to tell everyone what to do and precisely how to do it to get it done. Versus the coach leaders trained in coaching tend to slow things down a little and are happy for people to and give people that time and space to formulate their own action plan and follow and maybe make a few mistakes even, all in the greater good of creating that like that stronger system.
Yeah, and the empowerment of others. Absolutely. Totally, totally, totally. And I was not that person. Well, I was running my organizations. I mean, I had a natural ability to motivate, particularly from a visionary founder point of view. But I think there were definitely times when I was directive and, much more that kind of pace setting, directive leadership style. And I didn't really have a palette in terms of being able to adapt my leadership style in a way that, I now do, or I now work with founders, where helping them to, be more flexible and more adaptive with their leadership style, in order to empower others and to become a better leader. So I certainly didn't have that. I had aspects of it, but not that flexibility earlier on. But now for me, Sometimes I was talking to you about recent events that happened in my family where, I had to like, as the eldest, kind of take on certain leadership roles in the family, and that was fascinating. Walking the talk. I do leadership coaching as part of what I do, and really, the challenges of when a project came into being with the family, that was just happened out of the blue, and suddenly you got a whole load of different stakeholders in the system. You get your siblings in the system. You got all these things in, and I was really very, and a team was called into put by the purpose of the what happened for that period of time, and I was suddenly aware that I was being a team leader. And what that meant. So all of the work I was doing, on the coalface with the founders and the teams I work with was happening in my own life in a personal way. And many of those, the emotional intelligence that I was drawing on that a huge amount to be able to leverage the diversity, the difference in my brothers and sisters, and to help notice and reflect back perhaps some of the patterns that had been in play and ingrained, and of course, systemic team coaching draws a lot of its roots from family systemic coaching. And so, for me, there I was in the family system and everything that meant because of the or two projects we ended up working on together this year, and all that meant. And I found so much joy. Initially, there was quite a lot of butting heads and tension, and there was the kind of norming, forming, storming, or norming, storming. The Tuckman's model there. I always get it the wrong way round in my head, but I know it in process. That storming phase. So when you're norming, you're storming, you're forming, you're performing. That storming phase was definitely happening with the family, and then we started to form and perform because starting to work as a, if you like, I started coaching exactly to your point as a leader, and empowering as a leader and giving space, and also in quite a but very time bound, deadline oriented kind of not crisis, but it had to happen. Things had to happen, but giving the space and time, even in very tight, difficult, challenging deadline situations, which is interesting. So I was walking the talk and putting that as practice. I learned a huge amount in the process.
Is it? I always find it interesting that sometimes experiences are sent to test us, and unknowingly they seem to be preparing us for something that's coming. We have no idea of it, but then we look back and think, that's interesting."
Ah, spot on, David. Spot on. That's what happened.
I like what you said about the different styles of leadership. I read a recent book called the First 90 Days, targeted at people moving into like CEO roles, and it was talking about the fact that no one size fits all, and a different leadership style is perhaps required if you're going into a business that's completely failing and you've got to turn it around in a period of weeks, or else it'll be gone, versus going into a business that's good and trying to go from good to great. Different style will be applied.
Absolutely, many different leadership styles, and different situations for different leadership styles. Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder if I could quickly pivot the conversation to the work that you do now as a group mentor for Animas. What does that entail, Johnny?
Well, you know what? I just came off back of one this weekend, and it was brilliant. So I wanted to carry on as an alumni or whatever, supporting Animus, and in one way or another. At one point, I think there was even an invitation to become a trainer, but I was too busy to do that. I just couldn't commit to that role, as because of my coaching commitments. But I did start doing the kind of, there was some the RPGs, the reflective practice groups, which Animus has evolved since then, and now it's a group mentoring for the observed practice in module 6, and that's very much the 2 afternoons or 2 sessions over 2 days of the observed practices of the coaching, seeing their coaching, giving feedback, facilitating feedback in those sessions, and it's a real privilege. They've been on a journey, 6 sessions in. Of course, I know that journey, haven't gone on that journey myself. Of course, it's different now because it's online. It's not what we had it in person at the time, which was incredible. But it's just such a privilege arriving in the sixth session. They're about to go out into the world as coaches, if you like, well, finish their training and then, carry on their journey. And for my work, it's just working in that space with the observed practice sessions. And sometimes I say, look, any questions you have over the weekend, where I might be able to answer a question or help from my experience, then more than happy to share. And that often gets drawn on or whatever. And again, I might say that, but I will often say, but that's been my experience. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be your experience, because again, their journey is different to mine. Their business is different to mine. We're all different as coaches.
I remember you coming into the end of our cohort went to our last session, and I always think it's fabulous how the people who train the courses at Animas have all been through them as well. Um,
Yeah, I think, golly, when I did it, it was such a life change. It was a life change for me in so many ways. For me, I think the presence module was Carl Rogers was just that was the transformational moment for me, watching Carl Rogers and learning, being present, and all that that means. And recently, I had a coaching session. I was just reflecting on it, and I remember because I had done before Animus, when I was going through that awakening, that healing phase in my life, I had been teaching self-esteem, well, facilitating self-esteem and people on purpose courses in the early 90s. So I'd already been doing that. I was already in that space, but not coaching. It was early coaching, and it was wonderful. And so when I did my first coaching triad together on the first foundations module, I was with someone who's now one of your trainers, and I coached her. And I just remember kind of like thinking it was like being in this kind of transcendental state. This was before presence. It was just going into a certain state, not transcendental, but in a certain state. And I kind of, and that was my version of being present. And then I learned what presence was, and I was like, okay. But recently, funnily enough, bringing your whole self and all of your experiences together, to your point, I had a session where I did start to that literally I was like, that level of presence was almost like an altered state. And the client at the end, because it was so client led, and we just really, I mean, I don't know what happened, but it was just almost a different space was created. I think they call it that resonance chamber, I think, or something like that in Gestalt. It was just really that sense of the field that I was working with, and even to such a degree at the end, the client was made a point of saying that you know, they had to almost like switch off that part of that session because we had gone to that space. It was a really fascinating uh, experience of bringing together that slightly different sense I'd had in that awakening with presence. So when I wrote my theoretical essay, I spoke about creating a sacred space, kind of I thou space. Um, and when that happens, it's powerful, powerful.
so as we start to round off the conversation, Johnny, I'm curious. You mentioned, in terms of transitions, you're going through one at the moment, moving house, and I wondered what's on the cards for the future for you.
Mm. Wow. So I'm excited for more challenges for next year. I've kind of got again that kind of whisper I listen to. I run a podcast called Awakening Conscious Leadership. It's part of what I do, and coaching founders, coaching leaders, coaching teams, and kind of the resilience work I love doing, the emotional intelligence work I love doing, the disc work I love doing. For me, it's just very much about doing more and saying yes to opportunities as they arise. I'm listening currently to the Surrender Experiment by, I think it's Michael Singer is his name, and he wrote The Untethered Soul. And the Surrender Experiment, I'm just like, oh wow, saying yes and seeing how I might get in my own way, when opportunities arise, and to really to stretch myself, to develop and grow. And very much I've always had a very global focus, and doing more of following my calling, of following my purpose, doing more of that work. And it might include writing a book. It's been more asked of me than me kind of wanting to go like check, I don't know, tick list, write a book. People say, Johnny, when are you going to write your book? And I'm like, what book? And they're like, so it might come into being, but I think it's kind of scaling what I do. Is the thing there, having a greater impact on a global stage, and whatever unfolds. So I'm very open to where is that journey taking me. I find it's very much an unfolding journey, and I'm just loving the work I do. So it's kind of like more of that in service of my clients, the clients I work with, their development. And it's really, I'm getting a sense of being in service, to them. And that's just calling me more and more and more and more. So it's more of that.
Thanks, Johnny. And just sort of lastly, you mentioned there that saying yes is something you're looking to do more of. I'm just curious as to how you what your assessment criteria is for if an opportunity comes your way, to how it becomes a yes or a no. As sometimes we're often in that position where something comes and you think, I'm 90% a yes, but 10% of me's a no for one reason or
Yeah,
another.
I know. And if you listen to Michael's, his theme was an experiment, a surrender experiment. And you listen to him, it's phenomenal. It's off the charts. And it's like, and I don't know if it's going to be there or continue to that degree, because he literally said pretty much yes. He said yes to everything that came his way. Pretty much in terms of like the story he tells about his professional unfolding and the things that happened and where he ended up. It's just fascinating. Um, so for me, I think, yes, it's a journey of the people I work with. And, so for me, I have a process, an onboarding process, a chemistry process, a discovery process, a scoping process, a contracting process. It's, different for private clients, but coming through that route there. I have a bit of that kind of screening process. As my communication gets better of what I do, I get more and more of a fit with the people who come to me or get referred to me. So that's definitely something I've noticed. I get there's much more clarity in terms of, I'm a founder. I've heard you're a coach, so I get that coming through. And then the transition work is something that, that's a little bit more open. In fact, actually, I might even open that even further this year to, we in life, we go through multiple transitions, and we might be going through multiple. This is a transition, the move at the moment, might be going through multiple transitions at once. Some of them might be what we call life quakes, big transitions, others. And I'm really feeling myself being drawn more to that. So that might open the gate a little bit wider there. And maybe with that, I say, so I guess if you're not an ideal client, I have a process, and there's people I feel I can serve, and it's the people I might feel like I can't serve, and that's where there would be a no. And I'm clear about those boundaries are really important for me. And certainly my level of competency, if I don't feel competent to coach someone in something they've asked me to coach, then I will say no. All of that criteria that I have, that's no. And I would say those are boundaries. Those are clarity of like what I can and can't work with. However, where I feel it's a stretch, and where I feel that, and I don't know quite, that actually, you know what, that's a stretch. It's not like, recently I've been doing work where, you look at the behavioral ladder of change, and you kind of go on a scale of 1 to 10. And, really, I noticed that we set too far out of our comfort zone, a bit like an elastic band. You could be snapped back to like, that's in a fear zone. And that's something I'm going to run back to kind of comfort. But for me, I think when it feels like a stretch, and it feels I'm being asked in life to say, here's an opportunity, rather than, and if I feel like kind of the stomach, the nerves there are of like, oh, that's probably what I'm going to say. That's where I want to say more of a yes, if it's the right fit. But I'm feeling it's a stretch, but I know that I've got the competency to do it. I know I can stretch it, and deliver that. And where I might have had the nerves, which feel like I'm going out of my comfort zone, saying yes to that is where I want to be more of next year.
I love that. Johnny. Saying yes to opportunities where there's the potential for growth, and also the things that might make a great story. That's what I try say yes to.
Yes, I love it. And David, it's been phenomenal. Wonderful questions. Is there anything else you'd like? This is a coaching question, but what else might we need to explore before we complete? There we go.
I think my last question from me is, well, I'd love to say a huge thank you for saying yes for today's interview, and I have to say, you're also a master storyteller, and I recommend anyone listening to check out your website to read your story. It's really inspirational. And that the final question would be, where can people find you, and how can they get in touch?
Yeah, the website, johnnyhammondcoaching.co.uk. And I think too, it's interesting. I hear a lot of different views about websites. And I really just had my website as a calling card. It's just a place for me to put what I do there, and people to then on their journey to deciding to work with me. That might be one of the touch points that they go. So it's great. I love it. However, it has been generating quite a bit of interest and quite a bit of traction, and it has been generating business, which is very interesting. So that's my website. But websites I have found for me professionally, my website is a key component to what I do. I could exist without it, definitely, still, but if there's not the question being asked about, would you have a website or not? But my experience of having a website is that it's been a plus for me in my journey. But that's where you can find me, or on LinkedIn as well. Johnny Hammond on LinkedIn. Those are two places. Yeah, feel free to say hello.
Thanks, Johnny. And that's a really good shout out. We have a lot of people asking questions about, to niche, not to niche, to get a website, to not get a website. And, it's great to know that from your experience, having a website has been really fruitful.
Yeah, it has. It has.
Right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you.